We're really excited about this next session with Michaela Ayers, the founder and facilitator of Nourish, and Stanley Hainsworth, the Chief Creative Officer of Tether. Their session is on DEI. It's an important conversation, and it'll help you integrate this practice into your company or agency. We'd like to welcome to the stage Michaela and Stanley.
Well, so first, I would love to hear a little bit about your work at Tether. So how would you describe that?
Yeah, Tether is a multidiscipline storytelling agency. And we really start with the heart of a brand, which is the brand story, the mission, why you exist as a business, your promise, what you promise your consumer every time the consumer encounters you, and then the characteristics, kind of that brand as a person. If you can describe a person by their characteristics, the same thing as a brand. So I'm fascinated by that kind of brand storytelling, creating that emotional connection between consumers and brands.
How would you describe Tether as a brand?
Tether is a brand. The description I would give is casual intensity. So the way that we work is, we're intense about the problem solving, the brand building we do for our clients, but we do it with music, a wry remark here and there, and a great environment.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I can tell storytelling is really important to you. So I'm curious, where does that come from? Why is storytelling so important to you personally?
Well, I studied to be an actor. I have a degree in acting, and my dad goes, "Really? That's what?" Okay. But I was an actor for about 10 years, and in LA and New York, doing stage and commercials and TV and all those things, and then I kind of fell into the corporate world in the design area at Nike. So as an actor, of course, storytelling is what you do. You tell stories or recreate stories. And then when I started working at Nike, I go, oh, wait, we tell stories here, about the athletes, about, the products and all those things. And so it was a great place to learn on the job about branding and telling stories. So then I went from Nike, Lego, Starbucks, and then started Tether.
I love that. Well, I think something that kind of connects us all as humans is storytelling. I feel like that's how we learn best. Yeah. Since we're here to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'm curious about how those practices intersected with your story. When did they come in and kind of impact your worldview?
Yeah. Well, one thing I learned early on is the way that someone looks means a lot. Meaning that when you see someone, all you have to do to judge them is by the way they look. So the color of their skin, their hair, the way they dress. So all the external, you could say the least important things, but that's all we have to go on. If you liken that to a brand, it's like if you're going down the grocery aisle and you want to shop for cereal or shoes, whatever it is, not at grocery, but a footwear store. But all you have to go on is the way it looks. Until you try it, you put it on, you take it home, you eat it or drink it or you drive it or wear it, whatever it is. So that's the same as a person. All I have to do is judge the external appearance of that person until I get that conversation with them. And so for me, that's what branding is, the external first, the visual identity of a thing. And so what fascinated me about what I learned early on is the way I looked made a big difference in the way that I was perceived. So if I look like this, if my hair is like this perhaps, people expect you to have, let's call it game. They expect, wait, you look like that? You probably aren't an accountant, are you? They start judging who you are and what you might even do for a living by the way you look. So I was kind of fascinated by that, by the way, someone with, long hair and kind of hippie clothes, do I judge them as a hippie? And working at a coffee shop, is that there, a barista? And so that got me fascinated about the stories that people have, learning their story, and learning that I can't judge them by their outward appearance, because they usually surprise me.
Right.
in a good way.
100%, absolutely. What I'm pulling from that story is like diversity and the power of diversity, in that there is not, everyone is unique, and there isn't a single story that applies to a group of people. And that's, you know, essentially what stereotypes and prejudgments kind of trick us into doing when it comes to who we bring on and who is around us in our culture.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really hit me, you know, especially recently, is you could be, if you didn't know who the person was and they're walking down the street, if it's a 23-year-old black man, he could be a multi-millionaire sports star if you didn't know who it was.
Right.
Or it could be, you know, a kid from that is going to school in that area. And so for me, one of the big lessons that I learned early on was working at Nike, and I started in 1989, so quite a while ago. But the many of the stars and the people that Nike promoted were diverse athletes. And so one of the things I learned early on is we needed a diverse creative team that was going to tell that story about that athlete. If it's a bunch of 40-year-old white guys telling the story about, Charles Barkley or Michael Jordan or whoever it was at the time, then that story wouldn't be reflective of the audience and of that person, that athlete as well.
Yeah, well, I think diversity is, like, representation is such a core piece when it comes to telling authentic stories. And I'm curious, when it comes to the culture at Tether, like, how would you describe that inclusive culture? Because when I did some research about the company, there is a vast variety of people working at the company in terms of representation. So I'm wondering, like, what are those kind of core sticky ingredients that attract somebody who has a diverse lived experience to work at your company?
Yeah, I think this is something that we've always strived for, but recently also realized the faults that we have, or the gaps that we have. So this is a continual process, of course, and from the beginning, it's always been about that inclusivity, about the workforce for that same reason. And I think we've learned it over and over as we've worked with our clients, and we've had projects that need that diverse design team to really reflect and to build that story for that client's new product or their new brand that they're working on. So as we've strived to build that diversity internally, we've learned lessons along the way, and we've tried to incorporate those in our processes. Ask me about our processes.
Yeah, tell me more.
Well, one of the things is we created a little book. It's the Little Book of Tether. It's Storytelling 101 is what it is, and it has our mission, our promise, our tagline. It has our manifesto. So we have 10 points in there, and it has things like we are one, we are many, we take care of us. So like we take care of us is that we treat our clients and each other with total respect, and we're inclusive. So one of the things that we do when we interview people is we share with them our values, and this little book, we give them a little book, and we say, this is the work that we do, but this is who we are. And it's a little bit self-selecting. If someone's not an inclusive type person, if they're an I person instead of a we person, they wouldn't feel comfortable at Tether. So that's one thing on the inclusivity. Diversity, we have always had a goal to have a diverse candidate in our interview pool. So as always striving to have that. But lately we've instituted even more things as we've learned and some of our lessons.
Well, there's a few things there I want to pick back up on in terms of, one, having clear intentions, creating a communication tool like a book or something that you can use to communicate to your internal teams and to your external audience to attract them to the culture that you have. The other thing that I heard was having processes that also reinforce inclusivity, not leaving it up to guesswork or kind of what ifs. It's like, no, we have a process for making sure that we're inclusive of people who have different experiences and backgrounds. I think those two things together reinforce kind of the glue that kind of keeps inclusivity together. The other thing that I heard that I think is really important is respect, and making sure that that is embedded into the culture from hiring managers to individual contributors, really from a top-down perspective. How can we make sure people feel safe and that they're respected when they show up at work?
Yeah.
And I wanted to kind of dig into that hiring process a little bit, because I'm curious, when it comes to bringing in a diverse candidate, how can you make sure that bias is mitigated? Biases, we have them. There's not something that we can get rid of. It's hardwired into our brains. So what are the tactics that you use to kind of try to solve for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Maybe I could start at the very beginning of sourcing. One thing that we've realized is sourcing isn't an easy thing. There's not a set of diverse candidates just sitting out there waiting for your phone call, because the really good ones are really busy. they're employed, or they're working, so or they're coming out of school and they're recruited. So one of the things that we've realized is we have to be proactive in that. We can't just source like from Seattle, let's say. So what we've done is we've put together some documents, and those are places where we can source diverse candidates. So it's everything on the black side of things. It's historically black colleges and universities. So we have those identified, and the design programs within those. So being familiar with those. It's also places where we can place ads where they are, whether it's Black Lives Matter, or if it's a female focused, it's the female projects that are out there. It's those places that we can source. It's Latinx communities that we can source. So we have a list of all of those so that we can source from those and increase our pool that we have. So that's from the sourcing standpoint. And then once we have the interviewee that's coming in, we have we make sure to have like a hiring manager, a peer level, and then also an employee level. And then also have diverse representation within that, both by color and by sex. And then we have a list of questions that we divide up amongst, everyone's aware of the questions. And this is fairly new, these questions. Before it was a little more informal, but now we've formalized it, and we actually have a list of questions that we assign to the different interviewees. And they're pretty pointed. Some of them are like, have you ever encountered a diverse situation where you, like a racist situation at work, and what did you do about it? So they're pointed questions about the importance of diversity and inclusion in the workplace, and how do you feel about that? What have you done about that? So we can really get a sense of their awareness, and even if they haven't maybe encountered that, maybe they're out of school, at least start hearing if it's an important part of who they are, so that we can get a set of feedback. And then on the backside of that is we have everyone give our hiring manager, Becky, everyone gives her their responses, and then there's a discussion around that. So making sure that it's not a biased person making a decision, that it's a well-rounded input from everyone about what they thought about that person. And we've had some really good discussions because of that.
I love that. It sounds like a very robust and very relational approach. I feel like there's a few things in there that I would reflect back, which is one, you can't hire who you don't know, right? So when it comes to who's missing in our culture, who do we want to bring in, you have to be really intentional around the pools that you're kind of like looking to attract that talent and bring them in. The other thing is the experience of the user when they're coming in for the interview, and designing that with intention. And that's so much of what I hear in terms of making sure there's representation in the interview, interview loops, making sure that the questions are also very intentional. And I also pulled out, like, there's storytelling in the interview process when it comes to your lived experience with maybe racism, or your lived experience when it comes to maybe experiencing discrimination at work. One thing I would love to kind of open up is a conversation about kind of like cognitive diversity. And so thinking about outside of ethnicity, what about abilities, or what about like other languages? You know, just there's so many different ways that we can, especially, you know, if we think about creative people who lend towards like building things, there's so many different lenses outside of just your ethnicity and your gender that impact how you create and how you show up in the world. So I'm oftentimes thinking about ability as an example. It's like invisible, but also brings such value when it comes to a huge demographic of people who've been underserved for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So did you have anything else there?
Well, you know, one of the things we've stated 4 things that we're going to do as an agency, and we can talk a little bit about those. But one of those is kind of that implicit bias training, and that would include that there's bias. It's not just ethnicity. There's lots of biases that we have, and we have a commitment from all our managers to take courses in that, or get trained in that.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I think that's a good kind of follow-up to the next question around like the last 6 months, and what have you been learning about supporting your Black employees and or people who are kind of on the target end of bias, you know, whether that's explicit or implicit. What have you been learning over the last 6 months about supporting those groups?
Yeah, I think one big lesson for me was that around tokenism, that I can't just say, hey, you're Black, how do you feel about, what should we do?
Right.
And they go, hey,
yeah,
that's kind of your thing, I'll give input, but you know, that's, you know, you're in charge, you know,
right.
and it made some of them uncomfortable. So that was really interesting to me in an eye-opening way.
Yeah.
And I understand that completely. So that was a good lesson for me. I think that's, and one of the things too is that thing about being more proactive. When it's easy to be apologetic and say, well, we've always looked for diverse candidates, you know? I mean, every time we can, we try to find one, but they're just not around.
Right.
Well, that instituted that whole being more proactive. Well, where are they?
Right.
Just because they're not convenient for you doesn't mean they're not out there,
right.
and they don't want jobs or available. So that led us to start, you know, targeting the right schools, and not just, well, they're not coming out of UW, you know,
right.
or Western, or somewhere that happens to be convenient for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think kind of picking up on that idea of, you know, maybe you only have a few people of color in your office. You know, it's one thing to ask for someone's feedback, and it's another thing to kind of put the emotional burden of solving your culture problems on your Black employees. And I think there's a huge distinction there between being intentional, saying like, I see myself as, you know, this is my identity, I live in the world as a white man, I have limited knowledge of how to solve this problem, but here's my best try. And asking for their feedback versus approaching them to say, could you tell me what to do? Could you tell me what I need to be learning? That is tokenism, and that is, I think, what really can kind of unintentionally cause more harm oftentimes. And I understand that it's not coming from that place, but we're not really taught or really socialized to know how to approach each other in a way that's respectful. Yeah,
I think that brings up a good point. That's one thing, one of my learnings was I always felt like I needed to look like I knew what I was doing, you know, because when I started Tether over 12 years ago, I had never, I'd only worked in in-house corporate settings. I'd never owned an agency before, or even worked in an agency, and so I learned things along the way, amazing things. I had an amazing team to help me do all that, but I always felt like I needed to give everyone confidence that I knew what I was doing. But in this instance, this was a good lesson for me, as I had to come out and just say, look, I'm a 40-year-old straight white guy.
Right.
There's a lot that I don't know, and a lot that I need to learn, a lot that we all need to learn together. But help me, and this is what we're going to do. Here's the steps that we're going to take.
Yeah, I love that. Personally, I feel like it's liberating to admit that we don't know it all. You know, it kind of gives us some room to experiment and play with what the solutions could look like. And so I'm curious from your perspective as a leader, like bringing in diversity and inclusion as like some of the bedrocks of your culture, like what does accountability look like, you know, in this like we're all learning, we're all going to make mistakes, but how can we hold each other accountable?
Yeah. Well, one thing is state, first of all, you know, state what you're going to do. What is your plan? And so that's what we did, is state, and then we did that in a, you know, all studio session, and then we posted it on our, you know, internally, you know, on our internal communications. So state, and then report back is the other one, report progress, and then hold me accountable, hold us as leaders, hold us, the leadership, accountable. So those are kind of the steps, and then we took 4 steps. One was the commitment for the diversity or anti-bias training and all that that each leader has gone through already in the last few months. The other one is we realize that we can't always control what candidates are out there,
right.
and instead of saying, well, there's just not enough diverse candidates, that's why. So say, well, what are you going to do about it? So one of the things that we did is we came up with a mentorship program that we're going to start with the Seattle schools, and we started that in January 2021, and we have a task force at Tether of a diverse group of designers and that are working on a curriculum that it's an 8-week curriculum in the Seattle schools, and then we're hoping that if it's successful that we'll kind of package it up and make it free for any school system. So that is for the juniors in high school, those that are starting to think about what they should do, awareness of the profession, get them excited about the profession, hopefully they'll go on to school so that we can create the next generation, the pool. So, and then the next thing was stating our stance on like anti-racism and all that, and that's publicly on our website, on the homepage of our website. And then we have a set of resources that we as collective Tetherites have gathered that they're all clickable to volunteer, to donate, activism, all those things. So it's kind of stating what they stand for. And I might have left out one, but I can't remember what it was.
Well, I love that. I mean, what I hear in that is it's a multi-phased approach, right? It's not just one thing. We're not checking the box with anti-bias training. We're really making a commitment as far as, you know, putting something on our website, creating consistency internally in terms of what's happening so employees know. It sounds like you have employee stakeholders who are co-creating with you, which I think is so important when it comes to equity and how power is being shared within an organization. But then also, how can we create a community around us? Like, who's missing from our talent pool? How can we educate people who maybe aren't going to be at the HBCUs that we're looking at? How can we bring them with us? Yeah. So I think those are all very relational, which is something I'm always looking for with my clients, is because it's ultimately about people, right? Yeah. It's like making sure people feel safe at work.
And also, one thing I learned is you have to do what's right for you.
Yeah.
Like I started like, okay, during all the Black Lives Matter, that few months of intensity, it's like, oh, black square, should we put up a black square? Should we? It's like, is that the right? You know, because all those things that were going on. And then in the end, learning is like, okay, learn from all this, observe, learn, and then bring it back and do what's right for your organization, because it can get just so overwhelming otherwise. Right. And then make it a few simple steps that you're going to commit to and then you're going to follow through on. So that was kind of really helpful for me when I got to that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's super easy to bandwagon and just do what everybody else is doing, but at the end of the day, you have to do what's good for you. Like, what impact do you want to have, right? And it's like a personal journey. It's like a specific thing that everybody has to go through. Yeah. So I think my last question for you is, what would you say to a leader who's on the line today, who's passionate about DEI but doesn't know where to start? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of that, observe what other people are doing. So learn from best practices from people that are doing a good job or that you've observed to be a good job, and then part of it is just that humbleness of knowing that I'm starting from pretty low bar, so I need to get educated on what this is, and then that and then that publicly stating that what your intentions are, and then that hold me accountable. So I think it's keep it simple, keep it be sure and report back frequently, and then and have, because that will hold you accountable, because people, you stated that. So yeah, I think it's that simplicity, and then think what that future vision is for your organization. Like you asked a great question to me when we were talking before, is, you know, how do you see the future of Tether? And for me, it was like, that's a great question. So I kind of looked at our little book of Tether and all that stuff, and I thought, you know what it is? It's that high school program that we're instigating in January 2021 in the Seattle schools. In 15 years from now, in 10 years from now, or even less, the goal would be to have those students that go through that, they go on to a design program, and then we hire them as interns, and then they eventually become a director, a creative director at Tether. It's like, that would be really exciting.
Well, that's the future I want to be a part of too.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for your time. It was a great conversation.
Thank you, Michaela. Thank you.